achieve. Now, Open Democracy has highlighted high levels of spending on what it calls dark money by right-wing Christian organizations around the world. It says 28 groups, many of them linked to the Trump administration in the U.S., have spent at least $280 million since 2007 fighting against women's rights and LGBTIQ rights. To discuss this, we're joined by the Africa editor of Open Democracy, Lydia Namubiru. Ms. Namubiru, thank you for being with us. Why do you call it dark money?
Oh, thank you for having me. Why do we call it dark money? Because by and large, this is money for which the organizations do not reveal the source. So they'll generally just. So how do we know? We know this about this amount of money because they're reporting to the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. But they'll do the bare minimum in terms of transparency. They'll not say where the money came from. They say just grants, and it takes investigative journalism to find out where the money comes from in many cases. But also don't say with any level of detail what the money does. So we sent 50 million to Africa. But what the money does, once again, it takes investigative journalism to uncover what that does. And I think that's why we call it dark money.
What have you found? Because you say that they are fighting against women's rights and LGBTIQ rights. In what way?
So it depends. It changes from place to place. In Europe, there's been a sort of backlash against progress on women's rights. Say, like in Poland, there's been what right now looks even like a successful attempt to criminalize abortion, which had been decriminalized, decades ago. And so in fights such as those, you'll find these far-right Christian groups supporting litigation to do that kind of thing. In Africa, you will find even more extreme manifestations of their interests and their support. So you find them associated with people like David Bahati, who in Uganda wrote a law that initially proposed that gay people should face the death sentence for certain expressions of homosexuality or certain acts of homosexuality, like having sex while you're HIV positive. So it changes from one point to it changes. It sort of it dresses itself up. And it will push the envelope as far as a particular culture, a particular environment will allow. So you have them fighting comprehensive sexuality education in South Africa. You have them counseling teenagers against contraception in Uganda. So, but in a summarized way, it's anti-LGBTI, it is anti-reproductive health rights, and that's what it actually looks like depends on where they are working.
Ms. Namubiru, the right of a woman to get an abortion or a gay couple to adopt a child or get married, that is decided at the level of the state. That's about policy. And I understand what you're saying, but if they're not breaking the law, if they're not standing in the way of a woman trying to get an abortion and they're lobbying and they get involved in legal cases, that's their worldview. Don't they have a right to do that? Isn't that simply called religious freedom?
Right. So that's an interesting question that I ask myself too. They do, of course, have a right to say what they say, just as journalism has a right to report on what they do. But I think it's a democracy, democracy is always being negotiated. But I think that right kind of is a bit diminished when you're operating outside of your own country, right? Like if you're trying to influence policy in a foreign country, that deserves even more scrutiny, right? Like if lobbying in your own country is reported on, is often frowned upon. When you're doing it outside of your own country, trying to export your value system, trying to influence the policies of a country you do not live in, whose implications of the policies you won't have to contend with, I think that's what makes this sort of interesting. So we do not claim at all that they're doing anything criminal. We're saying they're doing this really fascinating lobbying and influence peddling outside of their own countries, and those activities have often had tragic effects, especially in
So my final question, and thank you for clarifying that. I was confused because I looked at your report and it looks like most of the spending has been happening in Europe, where you have very secular states. We've been seeing the French president fighting for the right to criticize religion, even in the face of beheadings recently. So it seems like in Europe that spending hasn't had much effect, but you're saying maybe in vulnerable African states it can really sway policy. And please be brief. I'm sorry, we are running out of time.
In Europe, it has. Poland just outlawed abortion once again. So even in Europe, it's turning back certain progress for certain rights, and that's often rights for people who are the most vulnerable, because abortion, legal or not legal, that usually affects the poorest in those societies.
All right. Thank you so much for your time tonight. That was the Africa editor of Open Democracy, Lydia Namubiru.